Okay, well, it looks like it's 7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you could all join us. This is the second in our Mighty Migration series, which is 3 evening webinars looking at some tiny, amazing creatures that make an amazing migratory journey. Yesterday, we had our first webinar where we learned all about ruby-throated hummingbirds. And tomorrow, we'll look at monarch butterflies. And tonight we're focusing on chimney swifts, how to protect their habitat, and some Swift Night Out events to catch in August and September here in Wisconsin. I'm Shelley Torgelson. I am the Communications Director at the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin. I am one of the co-hosts, or NRF is one of the co-hosts. At NRF, we love all of Wisconsin's birds. We host the Great Wisconsin Birdathon, which runs April through June during spring migration each year. And we have field trips about chimney swifts, and we've supported chimney swift conservation in the past. So I'm very excited for this presentation. And I wanted to thank all the other co-hosts for the series and for tonight. We have Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance and SOS Save Our Songbirds. And welcome also to our other co-hosts for the event, the BIPOC Birding Club of Wisconsin and the Feminist Bird Club of Wisconsin Madison chapter, and the Wisconsin Chimney Swift Working Group. A lot of people are obsessed with chimney swifts. So tonight we have a great presenter, Dr. Steffanie Munguía, who is Avian Conservation Programs Manager for Zoo Miami and Field Director of the longest running southernmost migratory bird banding station in the continental United States. Kind of awesome. And then after Steffanie finishes her presentation, then Brenna Marsachek will talk about how we can work together to preserve chimneys and talk about one particular chimney in Madison that needs our help. And she'll give some information about upcoming Swift Night Out events throughout Wisconsin. And then after that, we'll have some time for some Q&A. And just one quick note on technology. If you're having any trouble seeing the slides, try messing around with the view settings on Zoom. Should be in the top right corner. And just try different arrangements to see what works best for your screen. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Steffanie. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Shelley, and thank you everybody for taking the time to come out tonight and learn a little bit more about chimney swifts. As Shelley said, I work at Zoo Miami and I oversee our various avian conservation programs, but I'm here speaking tonight more as a member of the general public who happens to be obsessed with all things bird related. So before going any deeper into that, because I know many of you on this call are also just as obsessed with birds and potentially very specifically with chimney swifts, I do want to disclose I do not consider myself a chimney swift expert by any means. I'm an ornithologist, I am a conservation social scientist, but I've not focused on chimney swifts prior to this talk, so I hope that we can learn from each other over the course of the evening. But I will say I deeply enjoyed getting to know more about these birds that have fascinated me for so long in my life and that I've had the privilege of sharing space with across several continents. So tonight we are going to dive into the biology, migration, and conservation needs of these incredible small birds. So I think all of us in this call probably have a different thing that drew us to chimney swifts, that drew us to come out to this event tonight. And I think that's a really special thing, not just about chimney swifts, but about birds in general. We all connect to them in very different ways that speak to who we are as individuals. Maybe it is the distinct cigar-shaped body that stands out to you when you see them flying overhead. We were just joking before this, how distinctive of a shape that is to see in the bird world. Maybe you're a little bit more attuned to the unique call that they make. And if you've not had the opportunity to hear this, I'm going to try to play it for us briefly.
107-413.
I know for myself, as an ornithologist who is out in the field doing surveys, trying to identify the birds that I might find in my area and conduct censuses, it's really exciting to me to get to hear chimney swifts flying overhead. And it's just really special to hear that unique twittering and chirping that they make. when they start moving back through Florida on their way back south. Maybe you are one of those people who is very fortunate to have been able to open up your home and share it with chimney swifts, although ideally not your entire house, hopefully just your chimney. And I think that's a really exceptionally unique example of how these birds have come to coexist with humans over the centuries. And it turns out that just as much as they have captivated our attention, we have held theirs for some time as well. So let's get a little bit, before we dive into the biology, into the history of how chimney swifts and humans have been intertwined. I will say I tried very hard to find more references prior to colonization. However, it was really difficult to find information on chimney swifts specifically. Pre-colonization, of course, very well documented after that period. But if any of you happen to have more connections with First Nations and Indigenous folks and can help fill in those gaps, I would love to learn more about that as well. And I'm sure others on this call might be interested too. But of course, prior to human settlement in the structures that we know today in North America, they nested in hollow trees. They were even named by several Great Lakes tribes who have specific names, like the Ojibwe have a specific name for chimney swifts, separate from all other swifts and swallows. But interestingly, while they did consider swifts to be spirit messengers in some of their traditions, it was not specifically chimney swifts. It was other species of swallows that were believed to carry messages from realms beyond the earthly plane. Then in the 1600s, the 1700s, European settlers started to actually note that they were beginning to adapt to chimneys. These birds that used to roost in thousands in large hollowed out trees and cavities suddenly started taking up residence in their homes. And that, of course, caught their attention. But that adaptation happened so quickly that, in fact, by the 1800s, when they began to be featured in Wilson's American Ornithology and even in Audubon's Birds of America, if you actually read the species account for chimney swifts that Audubon wrote, it's quite interesting because it demonstrates how surprised he was to actually get to see them roosting in a natural setting as opposed to in a human structure. So already by the 1800s, they had adapted quite well to living alongside us and taking advantage of the structures that human beings were setting up on the landscape. Of course, that was at the cost of the logging of a lot of the old growth forests that they used to rely on, but thankfully they did find a structure that they could use, even if less effectively or safely so. By the 1900s, the large roosts that they formed became community spectacles, and actually it was in the late 90s that the concept of a swift night out emerged, and I think you're going to hear a little bit more about that later tonight, so I'm not going to steal that thunder too much, but it felt like a really important arc to sort of share this bird that previously existed on the landscape prior to European settlement and colonization, just continued to persist as a species that we cohabitate with, that we share space with, and really to draw inspiration from in so many different ways over the years. They symbolize, in addition to the spirit messengers that I mentioned in some indigenous traditions, they've been used to symbolize speed and even transformation in different literary references, which I think is just really fun to dive into how different cultures think about birds, and especially birds like chimney swifts that undergo these seemingly miraculous migrations, and even just the act of roosting where they seem to empty out of the sky completely. But why should we care about chimney swifts? First of all, and perhaps most obviously so, they're a great example of nature's pest control. A single chimney swift can eat over 1,000 insects per day. So they're fulfilling an important ecological role as insectivores. And for a little bit of context, it's about 1/3 of their body weight daily. And if you're wondering how much does a chimney swift weigh, on average, about an ounce. So they're tiny, but they are definitely packing a punch. And if you're curious what types of insects they're eating, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a little while, but they are in fact eating the mosquitoes, because I'm sure that is the question on everyone's mind. It is the question I've been asked as well. They do eat some mosquitoes, although they do tend to be higher flyers as well, and be taking advantage of other insects that are higher in the air column. They've also, as I said, become this cultural symbol in many communities, which is a critically important reason to keep them around. And finally, they are an indicator species, which in this changing planet is really important for us to be able to keep tabs on. They have very specialized habitat needs with their current reliance on human-made artificial roost structures, or where it is available in existing hollowed out tree cavities. Their diets are also extremely responsive to both environmental changes and more directly human-induced changes. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the science that has come out and helped to elucidate how their dietary choice has changed over the years for different reasons. So if we are able to track chimney swift populations through events like Swift Night Out and breeding bird surveys and all of these other ways that citizen scientists can contribute to our understanding of bird population ecology, we're able to also get a snapshot of what's going on in the landscape at large. So let's talk a little bit about the physical adaptations that make chimney swifts so exceptional. Their scientific name is Ketura pelagica, which is actually, I think, quite interesting. Their first name, their genus name, refers to a combination of two ancient Greek words, kaite, which means bristle or spine. So you can see in the image, the illustration in the middle, you can see that bristle or spine running down their tail, and ura, which means tail. So really a great fitting genus name for sure. And pelagica referring to, traditionally, this is what we think of as referring to oceanic, but in this case, it is a reference to the long migratory journeys that they embark upon. So of course, they were truly made to fly. That cigar-shaped body is streamlined and aerodynamic and allows them to achieve incredible feats in the air. And they do have those very nice long curved wings, which allow them to propel themselves even further and faster. In fact, they're one of the fastest flying birds. Of course, you're probably thinking of an even faster one that is diving, but for its size, they can go quite quickly, up to 60 miles per hour in direct flight. Lastly, one of the things that makes chimney swifts really interesting, and part of why they've adapted so well to living in chimneys and other sort of vertical structures like that, is that they have something called a pamprodactyl foot. So most other perching birds, songbirds that you might be familiar with, they have those 3 toes forward, 1 toe back. That's what's referred to as anisodactyl. And there's, of course, all sorts of different types of foot arrangements, but pamprodactyl is one of the most unique ones. So what actually happens with pamprodactyl is that they are capable of perching in a variety of different ways. They can perch in the traditional 3 toes forward and 1 toe back, but they also have the capacity to bring that toe forward. So their first and fourth digits can actually rotate all the way back or all the way forward, depending on what they need. So the good thing is that they are very well built for perching vertically on the side of a structure. The bad thing is, if you've ever seen a chimney swift attempting to perch on a branch, they're not so great at it. It's not very easy for them, and unfortunately, it can also be quite difficult with their body shape to climb back up onto a structure if they've ever fallen down, which is how they often end up in rehabilitation facilities. But those pamprodactyl feet are really well suited for what they are known to do, which is living in those chimneys and hanging on. So as I said, they do spend virtually the entirety of their life in the air. Of course, that is an oversimplification. They are going to roost at night. They are gathering to breed and setting down for at least a little while. But most of their life is spent on the wing. And as I said before, they can fly upwards of 60 miles per hour, which is really quite exceptional for such a small bird. Thanks to that speed and thanks to this very long journey that they must go on every single year in their migration, they can fly up to 500 miles in a single day and will cover more than 1.2 million miles in a year. Now, they don't live terribly too long. We'll talk about lifespan in a little bit, but that's still quite a lot of mileage to put on those little wings. And they will do everything in the air. Of course, they will eat. We've already talked about their insectivorous diet, so they're swooping around and capturing insects that way. They'll drink. If you've never gotten to see swifts or any other swallows coming down over a pond or a lake to grab a little mouthful of water, it's quite impressive and actually requires special adaptations to be able to do that. Not every bird is capable of taking in water like that on the wing. And we think they might even mate in the air. It's a little bit unclear. It seems more likely that most of the mating is actually occurring in those breeding sites, within those chimneys or in that tree cavity. But some folks have documented mating or courtship behaviors, or what appears to be mating behavior, occurring in the air as well. It's not out of the question. Some birds are capable of that, but it is a little bit easier if you've got at least some surface to hold on to. Now, of course, for many of us, where we come into contact the most with chimney swifts is during their nesting and breeding. So let's get into that. What does that look like? Of course, they are perhaps well known in this crowd, but they use a rather unconventional nest building material to hold everything together. They don't have the benefit of running down to the Home Depot and just gathering some plaster. So they have to hold their nest of twigs and branches together somehow, and they actually use spit to do that. I know it doesn't sound really appealing, but it is quite remarkably strong, as you can see from this photo of a quite loaded nest with several nestlings still hanging on. They'll lay about 3 to 5 eggs, which they will incubate for about 19 days. And typically the young swifts actually will spend a little under a month to get ready to fledge. You can see some photos of not quite fledged swifts, but they're getting quite close there in the bottom right. You can see all their feathers haven't fully molted in around their face. They look exceptionally adorable at this time. But about a month after they hatch, they will be ready to fly right out of that chimney with their parents. And shortly after that, they'll actually begin their first southward bound migration, which is quite a growing up experience. Talk about coming of age. They do receive full parental care with both the male and female parent providing food in what we believe to be roughly equivalent amounts. And actually, once they do fledge and they are able to leave the chimney, their parents will continue to forage with them and kind of teach them the tools of the trade as they get their bearings and learn how to forage on the wing. So I mentioned earlier, they don't live terribly too long. For their size, a lifespan of around 10 years is actually not bad, but typically most swifts don't make it that long. Their average seems to be about 4 years. So why? Why does that happen? First of all, they do have some very fast flying predators to outrun. Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, all sorts of birds of prey, including several different kites as well, do love a tasty little chimney swift morsel. While they are in the nest, they are also extremely susceptible to nest predation, and things like raccoons, cats, anything that might be able to get up into a chimney or into a tower, or might be able to just take advantage of a chick that slips out and isn't able to climb back up and out of reach and into safety. They unfortunately do fall prey to some of these different predators. However, increasingly, the biggest threats to their survival come from habitat loss and human activity. It is incredibly difficult to find a suitable nest site, and we'll talk a little bit more about what makes a nest site suitable in a bit, and it sounds like you'll be hearing more about that from Brenna as well at the end. And it's also difficult to just keep the chicks in. If there's a lot of disturbance, chicks are pre-programmed to abandon the nest if they feel that there might be a threat, not just for chimney swifts, but a lot of other bird species. They tend to jump out of a nest cup if they feel that there's a predator that is approaching and they're not going to be able to be defended against that predator in some way. So any disturbance to that chimney or to that swift tower or to that tree cavity might unfortunately lead to them bailing out and, like I said before, not being able to climb back up and into the nest cup. They are also, of course, incredibly susceptible to all of the threats that they might face along their migratory journey. And it is quite a long one for, again, a 1-ounce bird. So our chimney swifts will be leaving North America right around now in late summer or early fall. They are going to fly all the way down to South America over the course of the next several weeks and months to reach their overwintering grounds. Now, this is one of those things that's really interesting about migration. There is so much that we still do not understand about migration, not just for chimney swifts, but all birds overall. But we actually hadn't unraveled the mystery of where they were going until relatively recently for chimney swifts. It actually wasn't until quite recently that we first started to receive the first band returns And that was how researchers discovered that the chimney swifts that they were studying up in the Northeast were spending their winters in Peru because their birds were either captured or found dead and had these metal bands from the US. So why bird banding is so incredibly valuable. And of course, in the last 10 to 20 years, we've made huge technological advances in ornithological research. And now we're able to get even more granular data about where they're going. So they are not only going to Peru, they're going all across that western slope of northern South America and flying over Central America, the Caribbean, on their way there as well. So when you are a migratory bird and you have all of these different touch points along the way, it unfortunately leaves you susceptible to a lot more threats. We're also learning that these long migration journeys means that there's a lot more of a risk of cycles being out of sync. So we're seeing that especially with chimney swifts. They seem to be shifting more towards the center of the country, whereas previously they seem to funnel along the coast. They actually seem to be preferring to move more towards the Mississippi and Central flyways and away from the coastal part of the Atlantic flyway. They also seem to be delaying their migration start. And it's going to take researchers some time to tease apart why exactly that's happening. But for many other species that that researchers have studied, a lot of that timing has to do with cues like the emergence of insects, especially for our insectivorous birds. The emergence of insects, you need to have abundant food source. And of course, the timing and shifts in weather in your breeding grounds, the onset of fall and winter will encourage birds to move at different rates. That said, most of their migration for many bird species is triggered by changes in the angle of the sun, which is not changing that rapidly. So what exactly is going on? It seems like increasingly as things like solar cycles are falling out of sync with seasonal changes and fluctuations, a lot of birds are having a difficult time trying to figure out, how do I read the stars while also reading what I'm seeing on the landscape in front of me? All of these factors make roosts even more important. They're critical stopover sites on these very long journeys that these birds are embarking on, and the more safe and secure roosts we can provide them with, the better. And a safe and secure roost is not only about having a structure that is viable, but it's also about making sure that the food sources that they're going to be taking advantage of are appropriate and will be able to fuel them on their journey. So as we already sort of discussed, they breed in North America. They're going to winter in the Amazon basin. That's more than 6,000 miles round trip. And of course, they don't really stop flying along the way. So that's where they rack up that mileage over the course of a single year, up to over 1 million miles. As I said before, we didn't really know that destination until the 1950s. So I think it's quite interesting to think back to the history and the culture and the symbolism that has been attributed to chimney swifts over the years. And keep that in mind. Like, imagine yourself living in early colonial North America and just seeing these birds for half of the year and then suddenly they disappear. I'm sure you would have had a lot of questions. And so it's no surprise that people might have ascribed different meaning to that seeming disappearance and then their return in the spring and late summer. So like I said, they're likely using a combination of cues to navigate, but there's still a lot to untangle there in the research to understand which cues are most important. But wherever you are in the United States, you can now see, at least on the eastern side of the United States, you can see roughly when they seem to arrive and depart. So we get them for about, what would that be? About 6-ish months. So yeah, about half of the year. In the Intermountain West, you get a little bit less time with them. So for any of you who are out there, I'm very sorry you have to say goodbye to them after 4 short months because they're quite special. So we just talked about roosts, but what do they actually look like? Well, many of you have probably seen one of these already, but I just figured it might be fun to enjoy this spectacle. Getting to see any roost. I was actually just recently out searching for a purple martin roost in very urban Miami-Dade County here in South Florida. And even seeing that one on such a relatively small scale compared to this was quite a wonder. So it's really fascinating to watch these events as they occur. And certainly you're starting to see them start to funnel into the chimney there. As I said, these roost sites are especially important to them while they're migrating because it offers them an opportunity to rest, to regroup. It might confer some safety from predation. There is certainly safety in numbers. If you're gathering, it's a little bit harder for, or less likely for, one sharp-shinned hawk to single you out from the crowd of thousands of your friends and neighbors. And because they are such incredible spectacles, here the video is sped up. Don't worry, they're not moving that quickly. Because they are such incredible spectacles, they really do draw a crowd out, and it's quite a unique opportunity to witness one of the most interesting behaviors that many birds will exhibit. There's also a lot that scientists are still trying to understand about how birds navigate dynamics in large flocks like these and large congregations. It turns out there's been a lot of different debate about whether birds are looking at their nearest neighbor, or if there's a certain cutoff point that dictates when to move, how to move. It turns out a lot of our hypotheses were wrong along the way, which is just how science works, and also why it's so important to continue studying things, even when we think we've been staring at them for long enough to understand what's going on. Let me see if I can advance to the next slide. I'm not watching the whole rest of the video. There we go. Ooh, too far. All right. So that's what a roost site looks like. And I've been alluding to a lot of different conservation issues. So let's talk a little bit more about what those are, what's driving them, and how serious is the situation. So chimney swifts, like most other species of birds in North America, are unfortunately experiencing a decline. This is not a surprise during the time of the sixth mass extinction. It's not a surprise when we see the annual State of the Birds report demonstrating so many different species across the continent experiencing these declines. But chimney swifts in particular are on the orange list because their population has dropped by over 70% over the last 50 years across much of their range. And that's quite a large drop. The orange alert tipping species in the State of the Birds report tells us not only that that species has experienced severe decline, but that it also appears to be accelerating in recent years. So while you can see on this map there to the side that in some places the abundance trends are increasing, you can kind of see that happening a little bit here in the Northeast. There are some blue dots, but unfortunately for most of the rest of us who have the privilege of experiencing and encountering chimney swifts, their annual abundance trend is in decline. So that should be a cause for concern, and especially when there are so many potential factors that might be contributing to that decline. In many states and also in several provinces in Canada, they've actually been listed as a species of concern, which is hopefully going to afford them some more protections, and we'll actually get into one example of that in just a moment. So the first threat that they're facing is habitat loss. Now, we already talked about how they've demonstrated adaptability in the past to habitat loss. Their old growth, hollowed out trees were being chopped down for colonization, for settling much of the North American continent. And so they started to adapt to the next suitable cavity-like structure, which was our chimneys that we were putting up. That was way back in the 1600s, 1700s. Today, you can imagine those old growth hollowed out trees are even more rare. This is actually a photo from the Davy poplar in North Carolina, which is one of the largest natural roost sites remaining. But it's quite rare to have a spectacle like this, to see them actually gathering over and roosting in a tree as opposed to in a chimney. Now, there's nothing wrong with a chimney, but unfortunately, old masonry chimneys that are appropriate for chimney swifts to use are also disappearing. People are capping them. They're using more modern construction trends that do away with the structure that they need, or they're lining them in many cases to specifically avoid or prevent chimney swifts, bats, any other animals from using that structure. Now, on some level, this is understandable, right? You'd certainly want to be cautious about who you invite into your home. And there are ways to invite chimney swifts into your chimney quite safely without them also taking up residence in your living room. So there are ways around this. But unfortunately, times being what they are, people will build and they may or may not be taking chimney swifts into account as they do that. Now, that may not seem like a huge issue if one chimney in your neighborhood were to get capped, but what researchers have found is that there are actually pretty severe consequences to a lost roost. There was a study in 2021 that looked at a network of several roost sites in Ontario and found that there were a couple of roost sites that were critically important to kind of supporting the overall subpopulation in that area. And by eliminating even one of those critical roost sites, it actually degraded the population connectivity for that population of birds. So one chimney may not seem like very much, but in the context of this landscape of chimneys that the swifts are using and depending on as they migrate, it can be a really major challenge to lose one of those old masonry chimneys that's suitable. Now, another important threat, which I've already kind of touched on, because they are insectivores, insect declines have pretty severe impacts on their population as well. And in fact, when we started to see some of that rapid acceleration in population decline for chimney swifts, it was linked to the widespread use of commercial pesticides. Historically, we first saw that with DDT, which of course has become quite famous among avian enthusiasts over the years because that was also the same pesticide, the same chemical compound that nearly wiped out the bald eagle. But they are also today just as susceptible to newer pesticide products on the market like neonicotinoids because of the legacy effects of these different chemicals. So the photo that you can see there on the right is actually from a 2012 study of a very old chimney that had been used as a chimney swift roost site for over 60 years, I want to say their data set was. It was quite impressive. So it turns out, much like you might take a tree core sample to see what was going on in deep ecological time, you can take a guano sample from a chimney that has been occupied by chimney swifts for many years and learn a little bit more about what they were eating and what kinds of things were in what they were eating. So what the researchers in that study found was that during the heyday of DDT, chimney swifts were forced to shift from their traditionally preferred insect food source, which are beetles and kind of those hard-shelled insects. Those actually pack a lot of protein and they're an incredible food source for any aerial insectivore because it's able to fuel their fat stores and their muscle mass much more effectively than the true bugs, which they had to shift to. So during the heyday of DDT was specifically targeting some of those beetles and some of those preferred species for chimney swifts. So they had to pivot and find the next available thing. And while it was able to sustain them, it was not quite as high in nutritional value. The other interesting thing is that in these guano samples, the researchers found that there is still legacy effects of that DDT, even though that compound has been banned in the United States and throughout much of the Western Hemisphere for several decades now. It is still showing up in trace quantities in their guano from perhaps bioaccumulation over the years and biomagnification. It's still present in the prey base potentially. Lots of different factors potentially at play, but it's clear that it's not behind us. And when you add into that the direct impact of pesticides, which are obviously fewer insects, and add into that we still have other quite dangerous chemical compounds being used as pesticides, it does not paint a very bright future for our chimney swifts. Another threat that they face, of course, are urban hazards. Thankfully, chimney swifts are not quite as susceptible as some other migratory birds are to collisions with windows, but they do happen. And in fact, just a few years ago, there was a pretty mass casualty event in North Carolina. I believe it was in North Carolina at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And 300 birds just flew into the glass panel siding of that building. Thankfully, many of them were able to be rescued and rehabilitated, but sadly, many of them did not survive that experience. So that's one example of an urban hazard. Also, research has shown that they do still fly into things like wind turbines, which might seem surprising when we think about a bird that is able to navigate the darkness of a chimney, that it would not be able to avoid and to sense and avoid a wind turbine. But of course, if you've looked into anything about why wind turbines can be challenges for migratory birds, their sensation might be perfect, but the physics of motion around a central point is quite difficult to comprehend, especially when you're trying to migrate such a long distance. So the other urban hazard we've talked about a lot already are chimneys being capped or even destroyed during renovations. A lot of people just don't see a need for a chimney anymore with central heating. So unfortunately, this is one of those perhaps fashion trends that's going out of style in a lot of places. So the photo in the top right that you can see on the screen there is actually a pretty interesting study from a building that was falling apart and was actually set to be demolished, also in Ontario. And the inspectors found that there were chimney swifts that were breeding in the chimney. So in that photo, you can see the remaining facade of the building, which was where the chimney was previously, and that they were beginning to tear down. The rest of the building has been completely demolished. But because in Ontario, they had actually passed policies to list the chimney swift as a species of special concern, the province was actually required to keep the building in place for the duration of breeding season and reinforce the chimney so that the swifts could finish their breeding cycle successfully. And that's a pretty extreme example and a pretty extreme case, and actually started an interesting controversy with local affordable housing advocates who were really looking forward to this building being torn down so that more affordable housing could be put in its place. But it's just one example of this interplay between both the benefits and challenges of getting to live alongside chimney swifts. Let's talk a little bit about the conservation. What can we do to protect chimney swifts and to make sure that they continue to engage in these impressive migrations year after year? There's a lot to be done just in education and policy. First of all, as that example in Ontario just demonstrated, building codes can allow for chimney preservation, and especially for some of those older masonry style chimneys, building codes that actually promote historic preservation of some of these structures can be really helpful for chimney swifts to be able to continue to find those roost sites that they need. Lights out campaigns are also an excellent way to get involved for those of you who do live in more urban environments. Advocating for these different policies during migration season are incredibly helpful, not just for chimney swifts, but every other migratory bird that's going to be passing overhead as they head south in the fall and come back up in the spring. And bird safe glass legislation is also a great thing to advocate for, especially in an urban environment. Things are constantly being built. Figuring out how we can build them more safely for birds and other animals that live in our spaces as well is really important. I said already, protecting heritage chimneys is incredibly valuable. It's also especially valuable for heritage chimneys, which have been used for many years as roost sites, to be protected, because these swifts are going to come back year over year. They often do display some degree of roost site fidelity. So once they know that there's a chimney there, they're going to come back and look for it the next year. So preserving and protecting those heritage chimneys that they've known to be safe year after year is really valuable and saves them a lot of energy by preventing them having to search around for a new suitable roost site. It's actually thought that that might have been what was the cause of that large window collision event at the NASCAR Hall of Fame, is that they likely were trying to return to a historic roost site that was no longer there, and they were disoriented flying at night, which is not their typical time to be out flying. And unfortunately, they were drawn in by the lights of the building and into the glass. We talked a little bit about wind turbines. We still need to be able to scale up clean energy production in this country to be able to adapt to and mitigate climate change. So wind energy is going to be a part of that equation, but we can site it more responsibly to keep it out of major flyways. And there are also really exciting advances in the technology of turbines that are creating alternative structures that are less threatening to birds. And of course, public education is really important. Coming to an event like this or attending a Swift night out is a great way to learn more about chimney swifts, about what they need, and about what each of us can do to protect them. And when we can actually pair this policy change with public support, we can make a real difference in their conservation. I also like to think that conservation is about every single one of us doing our part in whatever way we can. So that previous slide, we were talking about these systemic changes, these policy changes that might be needed, but what can you as an individual do? If you happen to be a homeowner who has a suitable chimney that chimney swifts have been using or might be drawn to use in the future, protect that. Make sure that it is suitable, that you are making responsible choices that will allow chimney swifts to continue to use that site for many years to come. You can also construct artificial roost towers. There are all sorts of different schematics for this now. And thanks to all of those years of research, because so many people have been fascinated by chimney swifts for a long time, we also know a lot about where we need to site these things to make sure that chimney swifts will actually come and use them. We know a lot also about how to repair old historic chimneys that are starting to fall apart and actually not only repair them, but maybe even upgrade them by giving the chimney swifts more of what they need. And because we've been talking a little bit about those pesticides, reducing our own pesticide use in our daily lives is valuable. You can do that with your own landscaping, of course. As somebody who loves birds, you might feed birds. You can also purchase neonicotinoid-free bird seed, which helps to ensure that at scale, we aren't using neonicotinoids out on the landscape that might be harming these insect populations that the chimney swifts depend on. So as I mentioned before, citizen science plays a really big role, not just for chimney swifts, but bird conservation as a whole. I get to see this every single day with different programs. So anytime that you have the opportunity to participate in a community science event like Swift Night Out, and I did just rip this off of the Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance page, guys. So hopefully this looks familiar to some of you. I wish it would look more familiar in person to me because that looks like a fantastic event. This is a great opportunity to meet your neighbors, to meet other folks who are just as passionate and interested, or at least just curious about why there are all these people camped out on this lawn to watch one of the spectacles of bird migration. So these events are really valuable, and they are not only an observation event just for the casual public, they're also an event that allows us to count how many swifts are going into this roost and get a better sense of population trends. Also, if you are a casual or very serious birder, please continue to submit your observations to eBird. Those are creating, all of those observations create an incredible data set for scientists to pull from and are what allow us to figure out things like their population has declined by over 70%. So the most important thing here is that everyone can help. You can be a helpful, informed neighbor and manage your chimney for swifts. You can support installing swift towers in your community, whether it's through your local Bird Alliance or Audubon chapter, maybe it's with a local school. There are so many different options and so many ways to get creative and bring more people into the conversation, which is what makes those types of projects, I think, particularly fulfilling, because it makes for some new and potentially surprising friends. Reducing pesticide use in your own garden and buying neonicotinoid or neonic-free bird seed is really valuable for sustaining that insect base that they're going to need to power their flights. And continue reporting your swift sightings. As a community scientist, as somebody who just gets to go out there and see swifts more often, report those sightings so that scientists like me can go through and learn more about what's happening to those populations. Lastly, I think it's really valuable that everybody participate as an advocate, and you can do this at whatever level feels right for you. Maybe that's advocating with your local homeowners association for regulating and changing pesticide use in your community. Maybe that's going to city council meetings. There are so many different opportunities to be an advocate. So I challenge all of you to figure out what that is, so that not only you're taking those smaller steps to change your immediate environment, but you're also driving the systemic change that is really what's needed at scale to protect chimney swifts and so many other species. So with that, I just want to summarize again. I think it goes without saying, chimney swifts are just incredibly remarkable birds. They're aerial specialists. They are incredible migrants. But sadly, their populations are declining. And despite these hundreds or thousands of years of evolution that have made them perfect at what they do, it has sadly not made them perfect at adapting to the changes that humans have wrought on their environment. So they need all of our help to survive. And I hope that tonight maybe has inspired you to do a little bit more, or maybe has introduced you to a fascinating new world of how you can be a chimney swift advocate and friend. So with that, I think we might have time for some questions, and I'll just leave this slide up there for a few moments in case anybody does want to connect with me on any of these channels. I would be happy to hear from you and learn from you.
Thank you, Steffanie. That was wonderful. I mean, you had me at they eat mosquitoes personally, so
I had a feeling, I mean, as a Floridian, like that is the hook down here. We have a lot of mosquitoes too.
yeah, always open with that, right?
Yes.
And look at that photo. So great. Thank you so much
Yes.
for that. That was a lot of great information. We have gotten a lot of good questions in the chat. I've been watching, and I think we have time for one or two before we hop into the next part of tonight's presentation or tonight's webinar. The first one was a request for you to describe a little bit more about what it looks like when the swifts cling to the inside of the chimneys or hollowed out trees. Just with the cool thing with the feet. Tell us more about
The
that.
cool thing with the feet. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you hold up these four fingers in your hand, if you were a regular perching bird, your pinky would be back here and these three toes would be forward. If you were maybe a woodpecker, you might have two toes forward and two toes to the back, and that's what allows you to kind of climb up and down the tree and move in both directions. But if you are a chimney swift, you have the option to do this. You even have the option to do the woodpecker foot, and you can bring those two back toes forward and cling on to something with the four toes. So rather than having any toes pointing backwards, they can have all four gripping on. So if you're like if any of you do bouldering or rock climbing or have seen people who do that, it is not my personal hobby. I'm terrified of heights. But if you're into that, just imagine the grip strength that it takes to sustain your body. That's why you want to have as many fingers as possible, and you'll see them frequently holding on with as many fingers as possible to that ledge. So that's exactly what the chimney swift is doing in your chimney or in that roosting tower, just moving all available toes forward to be able to hold their weight upwards.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for that. We'll just do one more quick question, then Brenna has a lot of great local information to share. And then if you could hang out a little longer, Steffanie, to
Yeah,
answer
of
some more
course.
questions, that would be great. Another question we had was, have cameras that are in the chimneys ever collected information about how the swifts order themselves? Like, is the first one in, roost at the top? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So that was one of the studies I was referring to where we kind of had everything all wrong about how we thought that worked. But I think in that case, the researchers were actually looking at the dynamics of how they come into the chimney in the first place. They didn't have cameras placed inside of the chimneys. I'm sure that is something somebody has looked at, and if they haven't, it's a really fascinating research question. But there did used to be a belief that there was a little bit of a pecking order and a hierarchy to how they would funnel in to the chimney, which would imply that that same hierarchy might be replicated inside. However, what the researchers ended up finding was that funneling was kind of just the product of whichever 7 birds were closest to you. And you just did whatever was happening in your immediate vicinity and adapted to that so you wouldn't crash into each other. So still lots to untangle there, but I'll definitely look into more of that, of the dynamics within the chimney, because I think there's a lot to figure out there.
Interesting. It seems kind of chaotic having all of those chimney swifts coming in all at once like that. So
yes.
makes sense to be curious about it.
Yeah, I
Um,
can't even merge onto a highway that effectively, and they do this every single night. Like it's
yes,
wildly impressive.
awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, we'll turn it over to Brenna now for a bit.
Great, thank you. Steffanie, that was so wonderful. I learned so much, and it makes me so excited for the time of year that we're about to enter with fall migration almost here. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. For those who I haven't met yet, my name is Brenna Marsacek. I'm the Director of Outreach with Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance, and I'm a pretty new member of the Wisconsin Chimney Swift Working Group. And there are a few other folks on this call that are from that same working group. So if you have any questions that I'm not able to answer, I'm hoping I can kind of outsource them to other folks as well. So I'm gonna move on here. So what we're gonna talk about, what I had planned to talk about, Steffanie did a beautiful job of covering. So really the main things that I want to share is that there are things that we can do for chimney swifts to help stop or reverse that 70% decline in their population that Steffanie talked about. Home chimneys are one way, leaving them uncapped or unlined as much as is able. Someone asked in the questions if the home chimneys are nest sites and the big chimneys are roost sites, and that is exactly right. So a chimney that looks like this that's attached to a house would be a beautiful place for a chimney swift to raise their young. So if you can leave them uncapped, that's a great way to provide nesting habitat. And then, of course, these large chimneys are often on big old buildings, schools and churches and other city buildings. These are the places where large migrating roosts will come in at night. They also can be places where chimney swifts will nest, since there's only one pair of chimney swifts that will nest in one chimney. During the summer, it can be used for nesting, but in spring and fall, it can be used for these migratory roost sites. These chimneys are often in disrepair. So as they get older, they start to crumble, and there are ways that we can preserve them and restore them. And of course, that takes money. So that's a complicating factor as well, but there are certainly ways to protect these important roosting sites for chimney swifts. I know better than to talk when there are chimney swifts flying, so I'm just gonna pause here. So the chimney swift video that you just watched is from the Cherokee Heights Middle School chimney. This is the site of where many of the Madison Swift Night Out events happen. It's a school on the west side of Madison that has been a known, very large, very important roosting site for chimney swifts in Madison. And of course, these aren't just chimney swifts that are in Madison. These are swifts that are coming from all over northern sites that are migrating south, and southern places, those birds are migrating north. These birds are using this chimney as an important roosting site. Unfortunately, the building is old and it hasn't kept up with what the students need for learning. So in 2024, a referendum that included Cherokee Heights as one of the 6 schools that would be rebuilt or remodeled, that referendum passed, which is great for kids, great for learning. But with the deconstruction of the building comes also the deconstruction of a chimney that these swifts rely on. And so what we're advocating for is that in the new build, that a faux chimney or a dummy chimney, a chimney that's designed specifically and only to host chimney swifts, be built and attached to this school. And there is a precedent for this. There's an example of this being done in Manitoba successfully. And so we have a small working group that is advocating and working on communicating with the school district and the architects in the city that is asking for them to add this faux chimney to the building design. And we're approaching this problem in the early stages so that we can get in on the design phase before it gets too far into that, and then it becomes an expensive afterthought. So Over the next few weeks, we'll be sending out more information over email to the folks who registered for tonight, as well as a bunch of other people about how they can help advocate for this new faux chimney that would provide habitat at the same site for these chimney swifts that would be coming through in migration, and be able to continue offering that important roosting site. And Steffanie, I use that same photo that you use. This was actually taken by Caitlin Schuhart, who is a member of Feminist Bird Club. This was our Swift Night Out event that we did in 2023. So Swift Night Out, as Steffanie mentioned, is just a really wonderful opportunity for community members to come together and enjoy something they all have in common, which is a love for birds. And watching these swifts, especially when they're in like the hundreds or thousands, when they come into roost at night, really is like the most memorable thing you can imagine. It's really fantastic, and it's a really great community builder. It's also an important citizen science program, as Steffanie mentioned, to be able to document all of the swifts coming in. We always have someone who's assigned to counting the swifts, and as you can imagine, that's a challenging job when you have hundreds or thousands of swifts coming in, but we have folks who are good at that, who can do it and do it. But it's also a really great opportunity for people to come together and learn more about what they can do for swifts and enjoy the show. So this year, this fall, the Madison Swift Night Out will be on September 6th from 6 to 8. Just like every year, the Swifts decide where we host this event, because as much as we want to plan a specific location for the ease of everyone involved, you know, if the Swifts aren't using Cherokee Heights Chimney that year, then we don't have the event there. So the best thing to do would be to sign up for the mailing list or the email list on our website so that you get updates about where the event will be. We suspect it's Cherokee Heights because most years it is, but it may change. Then every night following that for the next week, we host Swift Week events, which is basically a Swift Night Out, but a smaller version of it. So these are informal get-togethers where people can watch the chimney swifts coming in. It's not a big event like the 6th is, but it's a great way to still watch the spectacle even if you can't make it on the 6th. We have someone from one of our host organizations there each night so that you can be welcomed and learn more and ask questions. These Madison events are hosted by Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance, BIPOC Birding Club of Wisconsin, Feminist Bird Club, Madison Chapter, and the Wisconsin Chimney Swift Working Group. So it's a really great collection of organizations that come together and celebrate swifts. Then throughout Wisconsin, there are lots of other Swift Night Out events coming up. So you can see the list here. The full list is with all the details, is at wiswifts.org. It's on the homepage. So if you see that image of the chimney swifts when you first land on the page, just scroll down and all of the details are under there. So depending on where you are in Wisconsin, there's likely to be a Swift Night Out event near you. So it's a really exciting event, and I hope you're able to join in. If you don't see your area on this list and you know of a roost, this is a great opportunity for you to help raise awareness in your community as well. So you could email the Chimney Swift Working Group. There's contact information on this website, and let them know that there's a roost in that area. Or you can fill out an eBird report and include the hashtag WISwifts in the comments. And that allows the working group to be able to track all the locations of these roost sites. It's really important that we be able to, the group be able to know where these sites are so that we can help both raise awareness of chimney swifts in those communities and also help protect roost sites if needed. So if you know of a site and it's not listed on the website, actually, I'm going to show you one other thing. I have one other share I want to do, which is a cool map that Rich Steffan from the Wisconsin Chimney Swift Working Group shared the other day. And I'm trying to get it full screen. Here we go. So this map here shows the location of known chimney swift roosts in Wisconsin. The red dots are the locations of roosts, and all of this data were pulled from using the hashtag. I'm sorry, earlier I messed it up. The hashtag is SwiftWI. So all of the red dots show that here. So you can see that there are quite a few gaps. There are probably more roosts and we just don't know about them. So if you report them, that really helps. If you know of a roost and you want to do a Swift Night Out event, that's another great opportunity as well. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to this here. And importantly, providing habitat for more insect population is a great way to support chimney swifts as well. As Steffanie was saying, these aerial insectivores rely entirely on insects. Native plants are a great way for people to support that in addition to reducing pesticide or eliminating pesticide use. But native plants provide many times more insects and caterpillars for native birds than non-native plants do. So by planting a native flower species, you're providing significantly more insect food and fodder for bird species in Wisconsin. And with more insects, there's more food for chimney swifts. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time with my mouse advancing. Oh, okay. So there are a number of native plant sales that are going on in Wisconsin this fall, and Lisa Gomnitz from SOS Save Our Songbirds will put a link to a webpage that has a few of them listed. This is a great way for you to be able to stock up on some native plants at a time of year where it's really great to start planting them. Spring is not the only time you can plant native species. It's a really wonderful time for these plants in the fall as well. So I encourage you to check that out. And with that, I think we can go back to any other questions that folks might have for Steffanie or about Swift Night Out.
Thank you, Brenna. I really appreciate you sharing all that info about where to see these roosts, because that seems like such an amazing spectacle, and I would love to see that in person, and I'm sure a lot of people here would as well. So thank you for that. And of course, the plug for native plants, super important. So yes, we do have a bunch more questions and we have a little more time, hopefully to address a bunch of them. The next one was just a request if Steffanie, if you could talk a little bit more about population connectivity and when that gets degraded, what that means for chimney swifts. Because I think a couple people were just not as familiar with that concept. So if you could talk a little more about that, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So what the researchers found generally is that when chimney swifts are gathering in these pre-migratory roost sites, any given individual may not rely on just one roost location. In fact, many of them are splitting their time, and maybe one night they are roosting in this chimney, and then the next night going to visit and hang out with their friends at the chimney down the street. So that connectivity, it turns out, is really important for reinforcing different social dynamics in these birds. It might even play a role in determining pairs in future years and helping some of these younger birds identify their potential future mates as well. So having the opportunity to interact that way is really important. But what the researchers also found is that not all of the roosts in a given network are considered equivalent for that social interaction piece of it. Some roosts just tend to be a better gathering place. They're hipper, more of the cool kids are hanging out there, and so more of the chimney swifts are going to those specific locations. So what that leads to is that if you're looking at a network of 7 roosts that are interconnected, there might only be 3 or so that a large percentage of the population tend to go to at some point to connect with other chimney swifts during this pre-migratory period. So if you were to remove one of those roost sites, unfortunately, that completely deteriorates their opportunity to interact with each other. It might have implications for their ability to locate a prospective mate in the future. it's still a little bit unclear what specifically they get out of these different gathering opportunities. But we do know from a lot of birds that do congregate like this, that do aggregate, reinforcing those different social interactions is really important for them. So that's a little bit more about what the researchers were looking into. The really great thing about that particular article is it is an open access article, which means that anybody is welcome to read it. So I'm actually going to put the link to that. You don't need a specific login or need to pay to read the article. So you are welcome to nerd out with me. It was actually quite fun to read it because they used a technique that I used in my PhD work to understand how people interact with each other in a landscape, and they applied that same technique to chimney swifts and understood how those individuals were interacting with each other in the context of these different chimneys. So definitely go check it out. It's quite an interesting read.
Awesome. Thank you for dropping that in. That does sound interesting. And thanks for talking a little bit more about how they use a variety of chimneys. Okay, well, there's a few questions about different potential places that chimney swifts might use as habitat, as roosts, as nesting sites. A couple people asked whether anybody was building masonry chimneys for their use, and there's a couple folks who dropped in local examples into the chat. There's one in Cherokee Marsh, for example, and one along Lake Michigan. But I was just wondering if and somebody else similarly asked if old lime kilns could be outfitted. We have a lot of those around to be used by chimney swifts. So I was just wondering if you wanted to say anything about other types of structures that they could use.
Yeah, those are all really interesting questions. I don't know specifically of anybody who's building masonry style chimneys in particular. It seems like, at least from the research that I did in preparation for this, most of the energy around masonry chimneys has been just preserving them rather than necessarily building new ones. But I would be happy to be proven wrong. I hope somebody is thinking along those lines. But generally speaking, those old masonry style chimneys do not seem to be being built anymore. As far as what some other suitable type of sites might be, I think Brenna did a great job of covering like the distinction between those large older chimneys that might be more suitable for large roosting sites versus the private residential chimneys, which are used during the breeding period. So those are all great. We saw a couple of photos of these artificial towers that people are building. There's a few factors that chimney swifts are looking for when they're identifying whether a chimney is going to work for them. They do need a decent amount of open space around the chimney to be able to access it easily, to feel that they're not at elevated risk of predation. Anytime that you are close to a vegetated edge, if you are a prey bird, it makes you a little bit nervous because there could be a hawk hiding just on the other side of that branch that you can't see. So having a little bit more visibility gives you the opportunity to duck out of the way should an attack come. So that's one factor that should be considered when you're siting these. There's also been a lot of research into the height of the chimney relative to the rest of the structure. I forget what the exact vertical difference is supposed to be, but there's great information about that on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife website, on various different chimney swift working group websites. The great thing about having a bird that's so captivating is that there are a lot of people who have asked and thought about these questions and answered them. So I definitely encourage you to go out and look into those. And as far as the internal dynamics of the chimney, the most important piece is making sure that it's not a slippery surface on the inside. They do need some sort of porous surface or surface with grain. So those artificial towers, those chimney swift towers that are put up are typically like wooden board. And so the horizontal grain of the wood planks on the inside are what the chimney swifts are able to grip onto, which is why it's so important to not have a lined chimney, because once you put in a metal liner or any other kind of liner into the chimney, it's just a slippery surface. They're not able to grab on, and they do unfortunately fall down to the bottom and aren't able to climb back out. So yes, there's so many great resources out there. I definitely encourage you, if you do happen to have a chimney or have a piece of land that you might consider putting an artificial roost tower out on, there are great freely available resources online to help you do that.
And can I
Great.
add something to that really quick,
Yeah.
Shelley?
Yeah.
Yes, Stephanie, that's a great answer to, I was thinking about the Chimney Swift towers, the artificial towers
Yes.
construction. I've recently been learning about how the temperature inside of the chimney is important, and especially in a place like Wisconsin, where evenings in spring and fall can get really cold. So having an additional layer of insulation between the rough sawn wood on the inside and whatever is on the outside, having some insulation in there can help stabilize that temperature through the nighttime for the chimney swifts using it. So just something to consider if you're gonna try building your own.
That's actually a great reminder for another related fun fact about chimney swifts that I did not realize, but even in those in the chimneys that they might be using for breeding, typically there might only be 1 or 2 breeding pairs using that chimney, but they'll have a lot of helper birds, and actually some studies have shown that those helper birds, having more birds in the chimney with them, is beneficial because the bodies actually keep the warmth keep the temperature up in the chimney, which is quite fascinating. We see that in bees, all sorts of other animals that do congregate. There's a benefit just in terms of elevating the temperature in places that get cold. So even if you are hosting a breeding pair, you're probably also hosting about a dozen other random birds from the community that are looking for a place to hang out.
Great. Thank you. The next question is, will swifts share a space with bats?
I love that question. So yes and no. Some bats do really love a chimney space. However, typically, no. And another important thing to keep in mind is think about when swifts are using your chimney versus when a bat will be using your chimney. So one benefit of having opposite schedules, our chimney swifts will be coming into the chimney at night. Even if there were bats inside of it, those bats have likely already exited to go hunt for the night. So even though they might use the same structure, the timing is different. Your bats may not be in that area at the same time that you have chimney swifts breeding or roosting, because there is such a seasonality to the chimney swifts presence in the region. So it's a yes and a no. It has been documented, but for the most part, you're not going to look up into your chimney and see both chimney swifts and bats peering back down at you.
That would be a very exciting chimney.
They're really popular.
All right. The next question was, do you have an active swift banding program in Florida? And would there be banders in other states, maybe particularly Wisconsin? And I'm not sure if Brenna or somebody else wants to chime in with the second half of that, or if you happen to know, Steffanie.
Yeah, I don't know about Wisconsin in particular. I've not heard of a specific chimney swift banding program in Florida, though. It's very possible that they exist, but as much as we try to stay in touch with other bird banders, you're not going to catch them all. Everybody's operating in their own little circles. I know we have a really robust purple martin banding program, but I'm not sure about chimney swifts here in the state of Florida, and certainly defer to Brenna on Wisconsin. Or there are definitely banding programs happening elsewhere. I just cannot tell you off the top of my head which states are doing it most actively.
And I don't know of any chimney swift focus banding program. That seems like that would be very difficult, given that if you're going to ban them as chicks, you would have to get them out of the chimney. And if you're going to ban them as adults, they're flying pretty high. So not likely to fly into a mist net. So I imagine that they're really hard to ban. But I do know that rehabilitators, wildlife rehab centers, if they get chimney swifts into their centers, they often will ban them before they're released.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. All right, the next question is, during migration, do swifts only stay one night at a particular roost before moving north or south? Or does it depend on factors like weather and where they're at in the migration process?
Yeah, it depends on all of those things, and probably a lot more things that we haven't quite identified. As I said before, also, they will hop around if there are multiple viable roost areas, roosting sites in a given area. They might choose to hang out at chimney number 1 for a few days and then pop over to chimney number 2 just down the street. It's not always really clear why birds do what they do. We can convince ourselves that we understand it, but it normally takes a lot more research and thought than we've already put into it. One thing that is definitely true of chimney swifts, lots of other birds in that same family, like purple martins, when they are gathering in these pre-migratory roosts, those tend to be a little bit longer. For the ones that are closer to their breeding areas, they will tend to hang out there a little longer until they kind of reach a critical mass. It gives more of the chicks that are fledging in the area time to actually fledge and come together into these communal roost locations. So those will be a little bit longer lived than their roost sites in, for example, parts of their route that are purely migratory that they don't actually breed in. Those tend to be more of a stopover site for 1 or 2 days, as opposed to communal roosting sites closer to their breeding areas where they might be hanging out there for a couple of weeks while they wait for more numbers to build up.
Okay, makes sense. All right, the next one is, I was wondering this myself. We talked about uncapped chimneys.
Yeah.
What happens with rain falling into uncapped chimneys?
That is a really great question, and I am not a chimney expert. So I would encourage you to speak to whoever helps to maintain your chimney. Of course, water damage is a concern. I know it is possible to put up rain shields or rain guards that kind of protect the opening, but still allow enough of a space for chimney swifts to go underneath and still have access to the chimney. You're not going to get as cool of a little vortex spiral happening over in that case, obviously, but it will protect that chimney in particularly for a breeding pair. They don't need to do the large communal thousands of birds funneling into a chimney. So that can be a suitable option. Again, those same websites that will tell you how to make your how to identify a suitable chimney for chimney swifts also include some information about what is the appropriately sized gap if you do decide to put in a rain guard like that. I know some other groups also recommend capping it during the time of year that chimneys are not in the area. That's one benefit to having the seasonal cycle. So you could cap your chimney as soon as the swifts leave and just uncap it when they are beginning to return to the area so that they are able to access it like normal. I don't know what the weather conditions are like in Wisconsin, but I will say, as somebody who lives in Florida, chimney swifts are here right during our rainy season. So I think it's a really good question to ask. And I've just not had the opportunity to be a chimney swift landlord yet. I don't have a chimney or own a property at this stage in my life, but definitely would be something I would ask if I had that opportunity.
Great. And then you and Brenna both talked a little bit about artificial chimney structures, like the ones made of wood, and how you need some insulation in there. But there's one question about how they are maintained. Do you have any info about that?
I know that there are, when I was researching a little bit more about what a chimney should look like to be suitable for chimney swifts, there are actually some chimney sweeps, some chimney maintenance folks who specialize in having a chimney swift friendly chimney. There are also a heck of a lot more folks who advertise their their services as preventing chimney swifts from getting into your chimney. So that's something to consider while you're out on the market looking for help. But they will do their best to maintain the conditions inside the chimney to make sure that they do have enough porosity, enough spaces to grab onto. Beyond that, I'm not sure about the mechanics of what that looks like when you're in there and actually trying to do that. But there are folks who specialize in maintaining the interior of the chimney to be friendly to chimney swifts, if that is what you would like.
Great. One more question was about finding those roosting sites on the eBird website. Any tips on how to find that hashtag, the hashtag SwiftWI? I don't know if you have any hints on that.
Yeah, actually, Rich Stephen, who again is part of a big part of the Chimney Swift working group in Wisconsin, has been answering those questions. So if you
Okay.
look at the comments underneath there, he's provided great instructions for how to do that.
Thank you. I didn't get down that far yet. And eBird, if anybody has not been to eBird yet, is an incredible resource. Go there and go nuts.
I'll also add that in the follow-up email tomorrow, I'll include a recap of the instructions on how to do that as well. So if you don't have access to the chat tonight, or you're just focusing on the slides and the speakers and don't read the chat, that's okay. You'll have the same information in the email tomorrow.
Great. Thank you for sending that out, Brenna. I believe that is all the questions. Anybody, Brenna or Lisa, if you see any that I missed, but I think that was it. So with that, I just wanted to thank oh, Lisa, did I miss one? I see your hand. You're muted, Lisa. You can unmute if you would like.
Sorry about that. Chuck Henriksen asked or noted he sends out bird reports every Monday night to 950 recipients. He said, what can I tell those receiving the bird reports about chimney swifts and their needs? Is there any kind of quick and dirty thing that would help him, or certainly anybody that has the link to the recording would be able to watch this, right?
Yeah,
could
definitely.
we share that out afterwards?
Yeah, so certainly share the recording link, but I think that the takeaway with chimney swifts, as with so many other species that have adapted to living in close proximity with us, the headline is learn how to be a better neighbor. Whether that includes retrofitting your chimney to make it suitable for chimneys or for chimney swifts, or if all that you have access to is habitat improvement in your own backyard. Just taking those little simple steps to protect their food source and protect their habitat, their roosting and breeding space. Like all things, they need food, water, shelter, and space. So let's give them those things.
Yes, here. All right. Well, I think that is it then, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you all for everything that you're each doing to help birds in your part of the world or your part of the state. If you heard anything that kind of sparked your interest and made you think, yeah, I can do that, thank you for any actions that you take in the future as well. So as Brenna mentioned, you'll receive a follow-up email after this. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you again so much, Steffanie, for joining us and for all that wonderful information about chimney swifts. I am now a giant fan, so thank you for that. Thanks for converting me. And for all you birders, enjoy birding during fall migration this year. And thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Tune in tomorrow as well. We have one more of these. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.